I am doing. Behold, I am doing. Behold, I am doing a new thing in your life.
Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Would like to welcome you to the Couples Fellowship of Goodnews Church, 54 Ahmadu Bello Way. It's a pleasure to have this opportunity to discuss a very important topic. But before we do that, I would like to introduce myself in case you have forgotten me. I am Mrs. Victoria Okori. I'm your anchor for the day, and in the house with me is, I'll let him introduce himself because he is the author of the paper we are going to be discussing today.
Good afternoon, brothers and sisters. My name is Dr. Jatau Ezra, consultant hematologist with the Jos University Teaching Hospital. Thank you.
You're welcome, sir.
You're welcome.
So, we had this topic that we had the PDF presentation uploaded on the WhatsApp group of the Couples Fellowship, titled Human Blood Group, Genotype, and all of that. As a background to that, we know from the scriptures in Genesis chapter 9, verse 4, that life is in the blood. And that's what informed this presentation and the issues arising from there. I'm sure we have been acquainted with that material, but the essence of today's presentation is to discuss some of the issues arising from that presentation and to throw light on some gray areas. So once again, I want to welcome Dr. Jatal to the house as we ask some of the pertinent questions that are arising from the presentation. The first question I would like to ask you this, there were a couple of abbreviations in the presentation. We saw things like RBC, WBC, DNA, ABO, RESOS, and all of that. So I think it would be good for you to break down some of those terms and explain some of them for us.
As a start, let me say, since we're discussing blood simply can be defined as fluid that circulates within the human circulatory system. And it is made up of the fluid component and then the cellular component. The cellular component is what you are talking about, RBC, which stands for red blood cells. WBC stands for white blood cells. And then, of course, the other cellular component of the blood is the platelet, which is not abbreviated in this sense. So those ones have different role within the circulation. The fluid part that I said is a plasma, is what carries the cellular components to different parts of the body. And apart from those cellular components that it carries, it's also responsible for carrying all nutrients that is within the body, hormones which we know are responsible for different activities within the body system. And then the cells have different roles also. The red blood cells contains a very spectacular component, which is referred to as hemoglobin. That is what actually makes it red. And that is the component that's responsible for carrying oxygen around the body. It takes the oxygen from the lungs to different parts of the body. And then from those different parts of the body is also responsible for carrying carbon dioxide back to the lungs for reoxygenation. Then, of course, the final part of the cellular component is the platelet. The platelets is responsible for ensuring that as the blood circulates within the circulatory system, it does not in any way leave the circulatory system as in bleeding, such that even if there is a severance of the blood vessel impairing the circulatory system, it is those platelets that play significant role in ensuring that wherever there's an injury or there's a severance, it's blocked so that the circulatory system maintains its patency.
Okay. Thank you so much for that introduction. Um, One thing that concerns every one of us, we all have blood, and we know about various blood groups. It was interesting to see that there are different ways that people can be grouped according to their blood types. So I would like you to just throw a little more light on the two major ways of grouping people according to their blood group. I saw something about the ABO and the rhesus.
Yeah.
Could you please throw more light on that?
Yeah. Medically, there's about 30 blood group system, but as you have said, the major ones that concerns us is the ABO and then the rhesus. All of them are dependent on the components of the red blood cell membrane. And usually it has to do with certain proteins that one individual has and the other one doesn't have. It also has to do with the component of that red blood cell wall being a sugar that an individual have and the other doesn't have. So when you put all those things together, it puts individuals into different blood groups. As I've said earlier on, there are over 30 blood group systems, and each system will contain significant number of, based on those differences in proteins, differences in sugars that are on the red blood cell. So majorly, what determines the blood group for an individual, it is what is contained on the surface of that red blood cell. Okay. So, but we're more concerned with the ABO and the RH. Of course, as I've said earlier on, all of them differ based on which protein and which sugar is on the cell wall. The blood group system for the ABO, as I've said, is further classified into what we refer to as the ABO, such that you have blood group A, blood group B, blood group O, and then the AB. While the rhesus blood group is what gives an individual's blood group the negativity or the positivity. Okay. So is a different blood group in itself compared to the ABO blood group. And all of them play significant role in physiological well-being of an individual vis-a-vis how it affects individuals when it comes to diseases.
Okay. Okay. Thank you very much. I think you have introduced the next area of interest to all of us. That there is a relationship between the blood group a person has and the kind of diseases that you probably are protected from.
Yeah.
Or that you are likely to suffer from more.
Yes.
Okay, I saw that quite clearly in the classifications. But before we come to blood groups and its relationship with diseases, I think of interest is the function of blood groups. Yes. I took interest in that. Yeah. And I'm sure a lot of questions will arise from there. And the first that comes to mind from the first point there about, I think we all are accustomed to the fact that because of the kind of blood group we have, you can't take blood from just anybody.
Yes, very well.
Okay, so we won't bother you much with questions on that. But I think what will be of interest to us in the couples fellowship and then issues pertaining to marriage and all that, marriage, compatibility, and blood grouping. How serious is that issue? And how seriously should we take it?
In a way, we've not taken it so much with seriousness, unlike when you compare it with other disease conditions that premarital counseling will require you to go and do tests on. Because, let me say, it's been silent for a while, but it also has a significant role to play when it comes to compatibility, especially when you again relate it to certain disease conditions, especially affecting childbearing, or even when a child is delivered. Many of us are familiar with children given birth to and within days or even instantly develop jaundice, such that you may have to stay in the hospital for a long time, probably have to go for blood transfusion exchange, or you have to undergo phototherapy. Sometimes babies are lost as regards that. It all has to do with that compatibility. And in the sense that every blood group an offspring has is based on what he gets from his parents, both the mother and the father. It is what he gets from the mother combined with what he gets from the father, like any other inherited gene in the individual that gives him his own blood group. So, in a way, you can have ABO incompatibility
Okay.
such that the baby's blood group is not compatible with the mother's blood group. And because it's not compatible, her body will react against that and produce an immune response that will be destroying the baby's own cells. And that is what eventually ends up with what we refer to as the hemolytic disease of the newborn. You see them with jaundice. So also in the rhesus, depending on what the father's blood group is and the mother's blood group, that rhesus for us is RH. The rhesus refers to monkey. So medically, is preferably you say RH rather than calling it rhesus because it's not monkeys we're dealing with. So that incompatibility also plays significant role in either ways in causing destruction of the blood cell of of a baby because it's not compatible with the mothers. It boils down to a situation where I know that it's common for us to go to hospitals and they say, okay, your wife probably is going to have a cesarean section and she needs blood to be transfused into her. A husband will say, because of the uncertainties surrounding blood transfusion, I would rather have my own blood transfused to my wife. And medically, it's not advisable. But generally, you think that's the best thing one can do. But because of the same incompatibility, it's usually not advisable except if there's no alternative to that effect. Because if you transfuse a father's blood to a mother, the component of that father's blood will have also been transmitted to his own offspring. And the offspring will be within the mother. And because she's receiving the blood from her husband, certain things that are not within her own system, her body will develop antibodies against, which eventually is going to be transferred to the offspring. And eventually, they will have those incompatibilities. So a number of things surrounds the compatibility that we may require for marriage sake, because you do not want offsprings to develop jaundice. Those ones that develop jaundice at birth are the ones we see. But there are many women that keep losing pregnancies because of this same incompatibility. But as I've said earlier on, we have not taken it so much into consideration. That's why nobody bothers about blood group. We rather concentrate on genotype, HIV screening, and the rest.
Okay, well, before we leave that subject matter on marriage incompatibilities, as a medical expert now, what would you advise?
Dependent on the fact that medically we know that the blood group that an individual doesn't have, you develop antibodies against. So if you have a child who has a different blood group from a mother, especially because the babies come through them, in a way, they develop antibodies against those children. So you can actually have antibodies that have been developed against a baby's blood group. And when that happens, the baby is likely going to develop that jaundice. And that can happen either from the ABO blood group or from the rhesus blood group. Statistically, we have more of blood group O in our environment. That is talking about the ABO. About 52% of Nigerians are of the blood group O. So, and blood group O already has naturally occurring antibodies against A or B. So it makes it much, much easier if you have a child who is A or B, that because of that, the presence of those naturally occurring antibodies, you just clear them at once. But on the contrary, if you have a mother who has blood group A or blood group B, the one with blood group A will have antibodies against blood group B. The one with blood group B will have antibodies against blood group A. So if they have a child who is either of this blood group, that is a mother with blood group A having a child that is blood group B, she's likely going to develop antibodies and the child can have those hemolytic disease of the newborn
Okay.
with jaundice.
So when you say child now, you're actually referring to the pregnancy.
Yes.
Okay.
It could be inside the uterus, it could be as the child is given birth.
Oh, okay.
So the implication of that is that you're looking at the blood group of a father and a mother. From the physical blood group, we know by the time we go to the nitty-gritty of it, that is the genotyping, we know that an individual who is blood group A, his gene typing when it is typed is either his AO or AA. Invariable means that if a father is AO, he can give to his child the A blood group or give the child the O blood group. If his own genotype is AA, he can only give A. So when it comes to B, the same thing. A mother who is B, her genotyping will either be BO or BB. So depending on what her genotype is, if she's BO, she can give to her child O or give to the child B. But if she's BB, she can only give B. So from that, it is based on that you can have a father who is A. And because his genotype is AO, he has a wife who is also A. And her genotype is AO, they will give birth to a child who is O. So it won't cause any problem. You understand? So, but if their genotype is AA, they can only give birth to children who are A. The same thing would be BO can give birth to children who are O. But if both parents are BB, they can only give birth to children who are B. On the contrary, if you have a father who is O, his own genotyping is nothing more than OO. You understand? So it's only O he can give. So if he gives O, the mother gives her B, they give birth to a child who is BO, the child will eventually be B because the B is dominant. But if she is BO and she gets O from the husband, O from her, so she is B, but the husband is O, they're giving birth to a child who is O. So it goes on like that. So depending on that, you can look at that, but because what we usually have as our blood group does not give us a genotyping. If you go to the hospital and say, I want to do blood group, they will only tell you your blood group is B, or they will only tell you your blood group is A. But they won't tell you your blood group is BO or AO. You understand?
Yes.
So until you give birth to a child who is O, then you know that most likely my own genotype is BO, though I'm blood group B. Since I have a child that is O. But the man who is O, he knows that his genotype cannot be any other thing apart from O. So because of that, you can look at the compatibility in that sense. It's the same thing with the rhesus blood group. Is either you break it into smaller component and saying, okay, R represents the positive. That's a big R, a capital R. When a small r represents the negative blood group.
Okay.
So a person who has his genotype for the rhesus RH blood group as R capital and small r comes as positive. While the person who has small r comes as negative. So if you have a parent that is big R and small r, and the other parent is small r, then they are likely going to give birth to a child who is negative. So, but if you have both parents having capital R and small r, so also the father and the mother, that's what I'm saying.
Yes.
So if he gets the small r from the father, small r from the mother, though the parents are positive, they give birth to a child who is negative. You understand? So, and when it comes to childbirth, if you have a mother who is negative, as I said earlier on, she develops antibodies against what she does not have. For the rhesus, we do not have a naturally occurring antibody. It gets sensitized first. It has to come in contact with the positive. So usually what happens, except if a woman has been transfused, a woman who is negative has been transfused with the positive blood, that is the reason why before you do transfusion, a lot of investigations have to go in so that you don't expose, especially a negative mother, to those dangers.
Yes.
Except if she has been transfused with a positive blood,
Anytime
her first pregnancy, anytime in her life.
Okay.
Or probably she has had a miscarriage,
Okay.
and the baby that she miscarried was of the positive blood group, she has already been sensitized. But otherwise, her first pregnancy, she will not have any problem with developing antibodies because that's the sensitizing point.
Yes.
She only develop antibodies against that positive blood group. So subsequent deliveries, if she has another child that is positive, she already has antibodies against that positivity, then the baby can come with jaundice.
Oh.
But if the child comes to be negative, then there's nothing because he
Okay.
doesn't have the positive blood group
Okay.
in him. So the reason probably why we don't get bothered is because there is a drug, especially for the rhesus, that can be used to clear those cells in the baby even before it comes in contact with the mother to be destroyed.
Okay.
And usually, if you have mothers who are negative, from their first antenatal care, they are advised on those drugs. They call it Rogam, anti-D,
Yes. Anti-D.
such that at 28 weeks of gestation, that's about 7 months, they give the mother that injection. So if there's any cell from the baby that has traversed getting to the mother, that antibodies which is given as form of injection will clear it up, such that the woman cannot develop antibodies against those cells. So at delivery, when she delivers, she takes another injection.
Okay.
So it clears anything that will have happened between blood of the baby and the mother, such that she won't develop the antibodies.
Okay.
So, but if that preventive measure is not taken care of, and she ends up having contact with the baby's blood, she will definitely develop those things. So as I've said earlier on, the implication to married couples is the fact that if the woman gets exposed to those positive blood and she develops the antibodies, she might end up sometimes losing pregnancies continually. And if she's able to give birth to those children, they end up with those jaundice. And of course, we know jaundice has its own effects on the babies. So based on that, you can say, okay, you need to look at it in marriage. But because we already have drug that can help, we usually don't get bothered about it when it comes to marital matters. But of course, it can play a significant role because it can result in a woman having continuous miscarriage because of that incompatibility that she has with the baby.
Okay. Thank you so much, doctor. So, you know, a lot of people ask these questions, this jaundice thing. So that is why it is so common now. This is what we do not know that might be causing jaundice. Thank you so much. I think the next point of the function of blood groups that you mentioned is the matter about paternity disputes and paternity confirmation.
Yes.
We will not take you, we wouldn't want to bother you to bother us either with all the details. I think one core area that would interest people is, I know in the past, to solve any such issues, it involved having to take samples, travel out so far, so costly, so some issues never get to be investigated or resolved.
Yes.
Right now, what is the state of technology? How readily available is what it takes to solve some of these paternity issues?
As you have said, some extent blood grouping can play a basic role in trying to, let's say, okay, maybe first investigations you want to do to confirm whether an individual. But the snag of it is, if from the explanation I gave, if you have a mother who is blood group B and her genotype is BB, and then she has probably a partner who is AA, and they give birth to a child who is AB, it will give us an idea, possibly this is the father. Because the child now has a component of the blood group of the father and a component of the blood group of the mother. But you cannot tell whether another person is involved who has the same blood group with that father. So that is where it's not a standard for determining paternity dispute issues. But when you go to the nitty-gritty of the genetic components of an individual, sometimes it's even the hair that you carry. Okay, let's check the genetic component of the male hair and the female hair and see, does it match what the baby carries? Because as I've said earlier on, when it comes to inheritance issues, you take from the father, take from the mother. Yes. So you can use the hair, you can use even just the scraping of the skin to determine this genetic component, is it present in this baby? If it is present in this baby, is it also present in the mother and present in the father? So that one goes to a molecular level. It is usually done via the process that is referred to as polymerase chain reaction, a PCR. And currently, that's what is even being used to determine whether an individual has the current COVID-19 stuff. Previously, you can hardly find it around here. You have to go to Lagos, probably pay flight, or alternatively, you pay for the lab individual that is coming to collect the sample to come to wherever you are. So it costs between 100 to 150,000 for you to be able to do those investigations. But because of the advent of most of those diseases that we have around Lassa fever, the current one, COVID-19, the polymerase chain reaction is coming closer to us. Like in just, you can get it in VOM, where the current investigations for COVID-19 is taking place. All they need to do is develop the template for a particular parent and the other parent and the baby. Then you can determine whether that baby is theirs or is not theirs.
Okay. Thank you, sir. Now, lastly, on the function of blood group, you talked about the fact that it can offer protection.
Yes.
And also make one more open to certain disease conditions. Briefly, could you throw more light on that?
Yes. Most times, infective disease conditions or even cancers has to do with a doorway. And most of those sugars that I've spoke about that determines whether this blood group or the other, they can serve as doorways for certain disease conditions. Such that if it is a particular sugar that the red blood cell of an individual has, that the organism can attach to and get access into the cell, then it makes him vulnerable to developing that particular disease. While another individual who doesn't have that blood group with that doorway cannot develop that disease. So it goes on to that direction. The commonest one that we know in our environment, malaria is very common in our environment, and there are different types of malaria parasites. One of the commonest species of the malaria parasite is Plasmodium vivax. It does not occur in anybody in this part of the world or among blacks. Just because blacks do not have the doorway into their red blood cells via that organism. So it cannot, an individual in Nigeria or in Africa cannot develop malaria from that particular parasite. But the others go in because they have doorway into the cell of the individuals. So for most diseases, for them to be able to have access into cells to cause the damage they have, they need those doorways, which we call receptor sites. They will attach to, then get into the cell and cause the damage they have. So that's how it plays that role.
So now you said, let me break it down. You said that most of us are blood group O. So let me take that as an example now. So what are the kind of diseases that will be common with people who have that blood group? At least something that almost everybody can identify with.
And I'm sure many of us look at themselves. A number of people have peptic ulcer disease. It's not that other people cannot develop those diseases. It's just that because you have that blood group, it puts you at an increased risk. You understand? So peptic ulcer disease is one of it. Cancer of the stomach is one of it for blood group O. So individuals that have those ones can be predisposed to developing those ones. People who have blood group A, B, and O altogether can develop a particular bleeding disorder that we call von Willebrand disease. So those ones can also be more common in the individuals. And of course, peptic ulcer disease we know is also related to some form of microorganisms. That one also is a doorway. Helicobacter pylori can enter into those cells and cause those predisposition. But as I've said earlier on, it's not that other people with other blood group cannot develop those diseases. It's just that because you have that blood group, it puts you to developing those diseases.
Okay, thank you so much, sir. I think the last point of interest, reading through the PDF, and I think a lot of people would want to know more about is DNA. Yes, the DNA and gene typing and all of that, and its relationship to sickle cell disease.
Okay.
Okay, so I think we'll allow you throw more light on that.
If we're talking about DNA in itself is a is an abbreviation for deoxyribonucleic acid. If we look at our basic biology, we know about a cell, the cytoplasm, we know the nucleus, and all the other things that are inside it. And we know that it is from the cell, from the nucleus, that replication takes place so that the cells will reproduce themselves. Even in our system, if you have a wound and you need a healing, of course, cellular replication takes place. So all those things takes place from the nucleus of the cells. So if we're talking about DNA, they are just the templates for the production of the proteins that forms. Usually you go from the cells to organs to systems. That's how it goes. So that one, they are just the molecular level of a cell. So, and it is what forms the basis for production of other cells. You have RNA, which is ribonucleic, which is a template for the production of the deoxyribonucleic acid and then the protein formation. So that's how it goes. So if we're talking about gene typing, as I say, gene is the unit of inheritance of a particular characteristics in an individual. And of course, the component of the gene of an individual boils down to all those proteins that are formed via the RNA, DNA formation, and then, of course, those characteristics are developed in the long run. Such that if we're relating it to disease conditions like sickle cell anemia, it goes to the fact that the proteins that are produced, that is supposed to produce a normal hemoglobin, which is the main component of the cell that is affected when it comes to sickle cell anemia, has some distortion because the protein they're supposed to produce was not produced as it ought to. So it ends up producing something that is abnormal. Then you end up with disease conditions like the sickle cell. So what we usually have as our genotype is actually the protein representative. But if you want to go down to the gene type in itself, it gives you the proteins that form that hemoglobin so that you can identify where an abnormality occurs to produce what gives the sickle cell disease.
Thank you very much. With regards to sickle cell disease, maybe I'm going backwards a little bit again.
Okay.
We all know the role that sometimes the church wants to play in counseling couples before they go into marriage.
Yes.
And all of that. And oftentimes we've had situations of dispute where people say, oh, this is the person I really want to get married to, but genotypes, we're having issues, AS, she's AS, and all of that, and all of that. And oftentimes it has been a difficult terrain.
Yes.
For difficult choices for people. As a medical practitioner, what advice would you want to give the church? Would you want to give to couples, parents, and maybe even intending couples?
Yes, is actually very important medical checkup when it comes to couples. As I've discussed earlier on the issue of blood group, we know that the compatibility has issues with certain disease conditions. Luckily for the blood group, we have said there are certain drugs that can prevent development of those complications in the long run. But when it comes to sickle cell anemia, I usually would say the presence of that gene is actually medically a blessing in disguise. In a way that genetically, we believe that the presence of the sickle gene protects against malaria infection. And we know malaria infection is a very common and deadly disease, especially when you look at children and in our environment. Maybe for us, because we are in malaria endemic areas, we do not see the deadly nature of malaria. Ask somebody who is not in an environment like ours, probably in America, in the UK, when they develop malaria, is a deadly disease. So, but for us, it's not like that, except in children. If you go to children wards, most of the times you find out 60% of admissions are as a result of malaria. They are receiving blood transfusions. Some of them are developing cerebral malaria and are dying. So, medically, it is believed that the presence of that gene is protective against the malaria infection, such that you read or you hear that people who are AS, they hardly come down with malaria infection compared to people who are AA. And it's all because of the presence of that gene. And we know that the malaria parasite usually finds its place of abode in the red blood cell. So by the presence of that gene, it depletes oxygen from it, and then the cell is cleared. So the individual with AS will end up not having so much of that infestation for him to come down with the malaria. So it's assumed it is, or it's believed it is protective against the malaria infection. So, but of course, where you have an individual who is AS and another one that is AS coming together, in the same way that I describe how blood groups comes about, you transfer to your offspring either of the gene, whether the A or the S. If it is the A that you transfer to the child, both from mother and father, the offspring will end up with AA, which is the normal hemoglobin. If it is the S, you end up transmitting to the offspring, which means if he has double of those in him or in her, she ends up being a sickle cell anemic patient. And because of the complexity of that disorder, it is better that an individual does not have an offspring with that disorder. We have already said from the beginning that blood is life.
Yes.
And if you have any anomaly that is going to affect your blood for life with barrage of complications, which ends up from head to toe, because his blood is circulating everywhere, then it is better you do not give birth to a child that has that kind of condition. Because a lot of things happen. They can have brain injuries with stroke. They can become blind. They can have low blood level. They can affect their heart. They can have those sickle cells blocking blood supply to their chest. They have acute chest syndrome. They can die. They can have skeletal abnormalities, infections that you cannot treat. They will have swellings in their abdomens and all kinds of things. If they do not have better care, they may not end up seeing the light of the day. So because of that, it becomes a very important investigation that one needs to put into consideration before one gets married. Such that if you are AS, as I've described earlier on, the chances of you giving birth to a child, if you marry somebody who is also AS, is 1 in 4 chances per pregnancy. Because sometimes some people have the distorted notion that if you say 1 in 4 chances, maybe my first 3 children will be okay, is the 4th one that's going to develop sickle cell. It knows every pregnancy. So it's possible if you have if you have a couple that are AS, giving birth to 10 children that are all sickle cell anemic, or you have them that are all normal, or you have a mix, and that's how it goes. But because you can't determine what will come to a particular child at a particular level, that's why this medical checkup becomes very important. Except if you are AA, then of course you can get married to somebody who is AS or even the SS, because the only thing that the other partner can give is the A, while the other one give the S. So you might just end up with children who are AS. And I said earlier on, AS is actually protective against malaria, so it's an advantage for them. It's only that when they will be getting married, they have to think twice. But for an individual that is SS and you decide to marry another person that is SS, the only thing you can give is S, which means all of you in the house are going to be sick, and you won't understand the problem that parents who have those children go through a lot till you go to the hospital. Time, money, and the certainty of life is not even there, especially in a system like ours, that despite the fact that we have large population of individuals that have sickle cell disease, our health system has not made certain things readily available to make life much easier for those individuals. So because of that, it becomes very much pertinent for couples who are intending to get married to be sure of what, for me, I'll say HB electrophoresis, but generally we refer to it as genotype is, so that you do not end up producing children that will be headache to you and even suffer. I've seen children who blame their parents for giving birth to them. By the time they begin to have pains, I've seen children who are very bright with prospects at almost the prime of their lives and going away just like that, and there's nothing anybody can do because of the system that we are in. But as much as possible, those ones that are already with us, we should be able to make life a little much more um, enjoyable for them by by not discriminating against them, by supporting them when they are in pains, by making available the things that they require to make life a little bit much bearable while they exist amongst us. But those of us who have not already gone that pathway, we need to think twice when we have to take those decisions.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much. There's not much to say. I think you have thrown light on the gray areas. And just as you have said, we have a responsibility to keep advising, to keep taking counsel too.
Yes.
Yes, because like you said, what use is it? Bringing in a family and children who would become a source of pain and will also be a source of pain too.
Yes.
So thank you so much. I think this is a good point to wrap up the discussion, unless you have final concluding words for us, counsel.
Well, as I've said earlier on, ranging from the blog group things, the advice I will give, as complex as it sounds and as important as it is, it is advisable that as many of us that do not know their blog groups, make time to know your blog group. I understand that sometimes maybe for admissions, for ID cards, they ask you blog group, people are used to saying my blog group is even when they don't know their blog group. So it's better you do the blog group and know exactly what your blog group, so that it will help you taking informed decision when it comes to those other issues that we have spoken about. And for sickle cell anemia, as much as possible, especially for the younger people, my head of department, who is currently in Canada, will tell you that even before, especially for the ladies, even before an individual tells you I love you, find out what his genotype is, so that it will help you in taking a decision, so that tomorrow you don't get to regret the decision that you have taken. Love, they say, is blind, but when it comes to issues like this, you may not actually be blind. And usually it is the mothers that suffer with the children. We've seen a number of them. So let's learn to take informed decision when it comes to matters like this. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. So we heard it all. I want to agree with the doctor. Love is not blind, though. Love is very, very intelligent and makes wise decisions. And I think a good take-home point is, do you know your blood group? If you do not know your blood group, this is the beginning. That's something we all can do. So once again, want to thank you, Dr. Jatal. And also, I want to thank you for the time and the opportunity. And on behalf of the Couples Fellowship Committee, we are saying thank you and have a blessed evening and have a wonderful week ahead in Jesus' name. Amen.